Welcome everyone to our C4 Metro, not C4 Metro, our C4 Toll Subcommittee group. I am Paul Savas, one of the Clackamas County Commissioners and one of the co-chairs. And Adam Morrow, our other co-chair, is unable to participate with us this afternoon. So I'll pass it on to Mayor Milch.
Michael Milch, Mayor of Gladstone. I should be able to be here till a little bit after 1, then I'll have to leave early.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Pratt or Councilor Pratt.
Valerie Pratt, Walton City Council.
And Councilor Sherman.
Hello, Mandy. Councilor Brett Sherman, City. Where am I? City of Happy Valley.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you all. And Brian as our staff support and doing the awesome job he normally does. So thank you, Brian, for your help. And he'll be looking for any attendees that pop in that should be brought in during the meeting. And with that, Mandy, I'll turn it over to you. Welcome to our group, and I'll allow you to make your presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. And for those that I haven't met in a while, I'm Mandy Putney with ODOT's Urban Mobility Office. I've been with ODOT for about 7.5 years and serve as the project director for the 2 toll projects as they're going through environmental analysis and review. And was going to be joined today by Heather Wills, but she's sick. So if you saw an earlier version of the agenda, she sends her apologies. I was asked to talk about the I-205 supplemental environmental assessment process and schedule today, and then also to provide an overview of the active traffic management framework, which is currently under discussion with agency staff. So I have those 2 topics in my slide deck. It's pretty relatively brief slide deck, and then I'm happy to take questions on those topics or others that might be on your mind today. We can go on to the next slide. Just as a little bit of context setting and make sure we're all on the same page, we are moving forward with a supplemental analysis through the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act process for the I-205 toll project. The project scope has been reduced. It now includes a toll at the Abernathy Bridge, still a variable rate toll. And that purpose of the project would be to provide funding to support the construction underway at the Abernathy Bridge and adjacent interchanges, as well as support congestion management goals in that location. And we will be looking at tolling infrastructure, including the overhead gantries within ODOT right-of-way near the bridge. So just to be clear, this is different than the project we were evaluating previously, which also included a toll at the Tualatin River Bridge and the construction of the 3rd lane in that 7-mile section of 205. Next slide, please. We did publish the environmental assessment for the previous version of the project last year, just about a year ago, and had received comments on that document. We have published the comment summary and responses in a report. And if you haven't seen that, I'm happy to get that to Brian for distribution if there's interest in that. We are now preparing a supplemental environmental assessment, which includes the revised scope and purpose. We are trying hard to use all of the work that many of your staff helped us with on the earlier version, and are maintaining consistency in terms of methodology. We are also using a similar approach of agency coordination. In fact, just before this, I had an agency coordination meeting. We had about 60 people attend. So, and then we're also continuing with a government to government consultation process with our tribal partners. Next slide, please. We are starting and doing our analysis now. We shared kind of areas of potential impact for all the disciplines at the meeting this morning with our partners, and we'll be sharing the findings and the data as we have it coming forward. We have monthly meetings set up with that group, and there should be a full overview of the analysis before we publish the supplemental environmental assessment as a document in the summer, this summer. And then we would be expecting a decision from Federal Highway Administration on the NEPA document in the fall. This slide here just overlays the toll project schedule, the NEPA decision and the NEPA process that I just mentioned, and also adds in the traffic and revenue work that is happening to understand and ultimately be able to lead to tollback bonds. So we have a level 2 traffic and revenue study. Those results should be out about the same time as the supplemental environmental assessment is out. And then we will do a level 3 study or an investment grade analysis before the commission moves forward with toll rate setting. Rates would be set about 6 months before tolling begins. And the toll program is also continuing to move forward with the implementation needs. The commission has provided guidance and direction on having a low-income toll program established and available on day 1 of toll collection. And at this point, know that that will include at least a 50% discount for residents that are experiencing up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And the commission has directed us to continue to evaluate the 200% to 400% of the federal poverty level. We also have been working on toll rules, which are part of a formal rulemaking process. Last year, there was a statewide committee that met and they sunset at the end of the year. Their main outcome was the development of draft rules, which have gone to the commission, the Transportation Commission, for kind of concurrence at the state that they were in. They're currently being reviewed by Department of Justice and will go out for public review in the next couple of months. Ultimately, those rules will go to the commission for approval this summer. And then we are moving forward still with a very robust public outreach effort and have our Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee meeting regularly, as well as the Regional Toll Advisory Committee meeting underway. But then we have ongoing ways for people to provide questions and comments, and we'll anticipate more in-person opportunities as we get closer to the supplemental EA, and have found that doing community events and cultural events in the summer are a great way to talk to people at locations that they want to be at. So all of that work will move forward as we continue.
Mandy, can I ask you a question? I was listening to, I believe it was Travis Brower. It may have been someone else from ODOT Friday morning, just watching online when he's presenting to the Special Subcommittee on Transportation in Salem. And he mentioned that this coming month, not this month, but next month, that I thought he said the EA would come out. I don't know if he was mistaken or I mistakenly heard what I heard, but what is coming out next month that he referenced? Do you know, or was he just maybe an error of the timing?
I will have to go back. I didn't catch that. There is not an EA coming out for the toll project. So I think it'll be around the July timeframe that we have the supplemental EA out. So I can go back and review the meeting. I heard most of it, but didn't catch that part. So yeah. I'll follow up with you.
Thank you.
I think this was my last slide about 205. So happy to pause for a quick moment if there are other questions about 205, or I can keep going and then provide an overview of the adaptive traffic management framework.
All right, Councilor Pratt.
Oh, hi, Mandy. I'm just trying to understand, like, so the EA publication is what you will put together, or, you know, you'll put together and publish, and then it says fall NEPA decision document. Is that what you get from the federal government?
Correct.
Okay,
So we work with the Federal Highway Administration as the federal agency that has oversight for this work. And we do need a federal decision on the environmental assessment. And then we'll determine how to go from there.
and what's the expected timeline? Like, it looks like you're looking toward the end of summer for your publication. And how long after that do you expect to hear back?
I would think in the fall, so probably mid-year, we'll have the document out for review, and then in the fall, we would hear from FHWA.
All right, thank you.
Counselor Sherman.
Thank you. So Mandy, I want to drill down into the the low income credits or offsets. So is that, I mean, in theory, right now, just kind of based on the modeling, it's a cliff at 200%. Below that 200% of income, you'd get a full offset or some offset, and above that, essentially it's a cliff where if you make, theoretically $1 over that amount, you're paying kind of the full amount. Is that kind of where we are right now?
Right, it's anywhere up to 200%, then you would qualify for the 50% discount.
Okay.
Right now, I believe the rules include a 2-year renewal of that enrollment process. So there wouldn't be like someone checking every month to see, has your income changed by $1 or not. But that cliff, as you call it, is the reason that the commission is interested in understanding what happens for folks that are between 200% and 400% of the federal poverty level. And 400% of the federal poverty level, just for reference, is $120,000 for a family of 4. So that is more than the average annual income for this region.
Right. I think that was kind of where what I was kind of trying to think through on this. I think a single individual is like 19.5 as the poverty level or something like that, so it's $39,000 would be that 200% level. So in theory, it's somebody who's taking home $2,800 a month, $2,700 a month, and at a 5% max toll, if they're unfortunate enough to have to drive across the bridge in each direction at 20 days a week, they've got a couple $100 worth of tolls, which could effectively be like 6, 7, 8% of their take-home income. So what I'm just kind of trying to understand, and this is, I think we're still kind of on it's an opt-in program, right? We're not going to look to try to capture information based on like whatever, data we have available to automatically opt people, and they have to actually register to be part of the reduced cost program, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so I think the data we've seen from other states is like 5% utilization of those eligible.
I think that the enrollment for discount programs based on income vary, and part of the determination seems to be how substantial the discount or benefit is. And when programs have a more significant benefit, they have more participation. And when programs have fewer barriers to enrollment or participation, they have better enrollment numbers, right? And so we have done a lot of research on this. We've been getting input from our Equity Mobility Advisory Committee, and we will have a very robust effort to work to partner with community-based organizations and really figure out how we can set up a program that is accessible to the intended folks to benefit from it.
Okay, I guess, and maybe one unrelated but related question kind of is about the initial data we saw on kind of net versus gross revenue, and there was of course that big question or big uproar about kind of the cost of infrastructure and all those things, but I know that that's kind of predicated on the notion that infrastructure is supportive of the entire RMPP tolling facility, not just tied specifically to 205, correct? So like when we were looking at like total gross revenue of $2.6 billion over the course of 35 years relative to trying to cover the cost of a $500 million project. So I guess my question is always, when we've done single projects before that were told, paid for projects, a couple of bridges that were taken care of in that fashion, I'm assuming we didn't have the same, huge amount of infrastructure we're looking to build. So that was kind of that's kind of the baseline with this, right? We're looking at kind of optimizing the cost for the tolling infrastructure overall based on that. Is that a correct assumption based on the larger future?
I don't know if I fully follow your question, Commissioner Sherman, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, so the Oregon toll program will include 2 toll projects, the Regional Mobility Pricing Project and the toll point at Abernathy Bridge for the 205 toll project. And then Oregon will also provide the administrative back office support for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project. The details of that still to be worked out in a by-state fashion. And the back office, the customer service system, all of that will support all of the projects. 205 is not on the hook to pay for that whole infrastructure. The back office infrastructure. 205 will, cover the gantries that are located for toll collection at 205.
Right. But my point being, the original documentation we saw that kind of showed the net versus gross revenue stream and, and a huge disparity between those kind of builds in the assumption that a lot of that infrastructure we're building out is going to be for the larger multi-projects, not just the document is showing the impact on 205 as if it were standalone, correct? Or is that just the 205 portion of the overarching costs?
The latter.
Okay. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you.
Mayor Milch.
Going back to the question of the discount for low income, is eligibility for that and identification of people who qualify for that going to be built into the little transponder sticker that goes in the car? In other words, if you drive through and you're qualified for that discount, will your account only be charged the discounted rate, or will you be charged the full rate and then somewhere secondarily they have to make the adjustment that you qualify for a discount?
The discounted rate. So when you register for your account, you'll be able to indicate kind of what your registration status is, I guess, whether you're part of the low income program or whether you are not.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mandy, for your responses. Before we move on to the next piece, I'd be remiss not to just say back to the calendaring. You've heard a number of us asking for more than the 30 days to review the EA. And just as a reminder, and that a lot of our city councils in the region, Clackamas County, of course, as well, we don't necessarily meet on regular basis. So by the time the staff gets a document, whatever it may be, the time to review it and analyze it, prepare a meeting, post it, the meeting meets, and then make a decision, that takes time. And depending on what day it lands on, it could actually be 6 weeks before that can happen based on the timing. I know the timing of city council meetings is not all the same. It could be the first week, the second week, the third week, but I would just implore ODOT staff to be mindful of that, as well as the public aspects of that, so to allow us more time than the 30 days. So that's just my pitch, and I'll let you carry on.
Great, appreciate that. Okay, so I will switch now to the adaptive traffic management framework, and of course, at the end, I'm able to go back for more questions on 205 if they come up. This is a programmatic element for the Oregon toll program. And for those of you that were members of the previous diversion subcommittee, you saw some early information about monitoring and how we were considering going forward. Some of you might have heard a presentation from WSDOT staff. And so overall, this is a process and a commitment for ODOT to do ongoing traffic monitoring and management as needed, and to do that in a collaborative and multi-jurisdictional way. And I will say that we've been talking about this with agency staff for a little while now, and we'll have a staff level framework to present to the next RTAC meeting in March. So we're still working through some iterations of the actual document, but feel like it's in good enough shape to say that I think that these are going to be components of the framework that's presented to RTAC in March. And we have borrowed kind of best practices from monitoring that happens in other toll programs, and also leaned heavily on the lessons learned north of us in Washington for the monitoring efforts that were underway. So we are looking at a framework, a process that will ultimately apply to both toll projects, and then each of the projects will have their own specific monitoring plan. We will rely on a multi-agency kind of work group structure, and we'll work to identify where we're going to be doing the monitoring, and including locations to establish baseline data, and then what the metrics would be for performance and the frequency of data collection and reporting, and a process for determining how we develop the response strategy and then implementation. We can go on to the next slide. This slide gives an idea of kind of the work groups that we're thinking we would do, that we would have some that are technical to really get into the traffic issues. This would be traffic modelers and planners to really work through the data needs and to have an understanding of who's collecting what data right now. Are there gaps? Are there ways that we can adjust the frequency of that data being collected and to sync it up better? And then to be available to review the incoming data as it's available. We also think it would be helpful to have an executive work group with agency leadership, so that they would be able to provide input and approval if needed as we move along with the monitoring effort. And then also think that coordination with the communication professionals at different agencies will be helpful as we go and we start having post-implementation data available and to share. The next slide, please. Once we have the framework identified, again, that's probably the end of March timeframe, we can then get to work on the project-specific plan for the 205 toll project. And the other thing that we'll need to really dig into this is that we'll likely rely on the analysis underway with the travel demand model and the DTA analysis for the supplemental EA to help identify like where there might be corridors of concern or diversion corridors, and then to start to think about the specific monitoring plans that make sense for 205, as well as who should be involved in which of the work groups, you know, what jurisdictions or agencies or, you know, state police, that sort of conversation will happen. And then again, we will rely on the technical working group to really help us dig into the evaluation and monitoring and metrics piece. I think that might be, this last slide is just to show you kind of the work that's been going on in February and will happen in March as well with the staff working group that supports the Regional Toll Advisory Committee. And they've been doing a lot of work in terms of review and comment and iteration on our draft process document. And we should have it available. We will have it available in advance of our TAC meeting in March, which is March 18th.
Great. Thank you, Mandy. One question I have, or I actually have a few here, but one of them is there anything, you know, I've seen the monitoring presentation at our TAC and a couple other times as well. So is it just really a name change now to adaptive management framework? Is that the new word, and we're going to forego using monitoring as the title?
Yeah, I mean, we did get input from staff that many of your staff that the word monitoring seemed to be a passive description of what we were doing, and that there was a desire to have more emphasis on taking action as needed. So I don't know that we ended up with a better title or not, but a core element of what this adaptive traffic management framework will be is to establish a specific monitoring plan for the projects.
Okay. My other question is, what in the EA, if mitigation is identified in the coming EA, will that mitigation be completed before tolling is collected, tolling starts?
I'm not sure. So we will first look at where there's impacts and then determine the appropriate response and timing for that. And as a reminder, we are looking out to 2045 for our analysis. One of the benefits of doing this sort of monitoring that's really grounded in data and science is that we'll be confident that we are doing the most cost-effective approach to on-the-ground travel conditions. You know, we do know that there's an expectation that it'll take a little while for travel patterns to settle after we do the project. And so I am not trying to sound evasive, but we just don't know what the impacts might be and what will make sense to do first or post implementation.
Okay, well, that concerns me a little bit, and I'm going to be as polite as I can, but should I infer then that maybe no mitigation will take place before tolling starts? Because if that's the premise, then it seems like it's more is, well, maybe we'll do it afterwards.
Well, again, I'd like to come back and talk to you all about our approach to mitigation once we have an understanding of what the impacts are. And as a reminder, we are looking at impacts that relate to safety, to operations, to transit, and to bikes and pedestrians. And so in a month or two, we should have much more information about impacts and then our approach to addressing them. So I'm happy to provide all those details once we have more information.
Okay, one more question, and I'll like to hear from Mayor Milch. He's got his hand up, and any others that want to ask a question. That is, so, you know, my concern about the last question that you just responded to is really there's, from our standpoint, the existing diversion, not toll diversion, but the existing diversion as a result of the bottleneck, right? Still an ODOT facility, still failing, still at, you know, in the old days, what we call level F. At times, traffic at a standstill, and the safety issues that go along with it, being that is unforeseen timeline where that bottleneck gets fixed. You know, when you spoke about the if conditions exceed performance thresholds, a number of us would argue they exceed performance thresholds today. So therefore, one would naturally assume that some mitigation should be in place now. Otherwise, we're just going to make our roads even more dangerous and our local roads and more congested than they are today. So, what defines exceeding or the thresholds? What's the threshold? How's that defined when that's excessive or goes beyond that threshold?
Right. So the work that we'll be doing is to determine what impacts the toll project has. So we will take into account the conditions that will be there if we don't do the project, and then compare doing the project to be able to determine where the project is creating an impact. And I understand there are problems on the current system. And if the toll project makes those worse or creates new problems, then those would be areas that we'd be looking to address. There'll, you know, are ongoing and parallel conversations about the existing system and how to move forward with work that's probably needed with or without the toll project. But the analysis that we'll do will highlight if there are safety impacts or operational impacts associated with the implementation of tolling.
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice Friday morning when I was watching the slides that the term toll diversion, kind of what you're almost saying here, that toll diversion is being identified as something different than maybe the diversion as a result of the bottleneck, right? And I know there's also the change of terms where rerouting. So do you see the term rerouting as a new term for diversion, or simply for the toll diversion, or for the bottleneck diversion? How would you apply the rerouting definition or language?
Sure. I think that the point of talking about rerouting was to explain that people make travel decisions for a variety of reasons, and they do that today based on where they want to travel, where, like, the chain of events of their trip, the level of congestion. There could be a whole variety of factors, and we don't necessarily know. Once we introduce tolling, we are able to determine the diversion, the toll related diversion. And so that is what we're measuring with a toll project, is how does tolling, that price point, how does that affect decisions?
Thank you. Mayor Milch, thanks for your patience.
All right. Just for some clarification, I think I understand this. When you talk about identifying corridors and monitoring them, you're not talking about strictly freeway corridors, like the number of cars moving between Highway 43 and Stafford Road, or Stafford Road and I-5, but you're also, wouldn't you also be looking at corridors like 99E or Stafford Road itself? To measure, and that's where you get some baseline on existing levels of diversion and existing traffic in those areas. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yep. And the traffic modelers tell me that we'd want to do establish baseline conditions the year before tolling begins, so that it's relatively current in terms of conditions.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Councilor Sherman.
Thank you. So I actually kind of hadn't heard the notion of toll related diversion versus not, but I think it, and I didn't watch the last presentations or the last information on Friday. So I guess so is the notion of differentiating toll related versus pre-existing diversion does then that kind of or it begs the question, are we then looking to only use toll revenue to address toll related diversion and not pre-existing, or is this project still there to address diversion as a diversion mitigation as a more broader concept?
The 205 toll project's purpose is to provide revenue to contribute to the construction costs of Abernathy Bridge, and the toll revenue can also be used for mitigation required for the toll project. And, as long as it falls in line with federal and state law and requirements. And then if there's extra funds, then money could be used elsewhere on the 205 corridor or surrounding area.
Okay.
And
so
the videos from the special subcommittee are online. So if you have time,
I do appreciate that. I will be happy to check that out. I mean, I think, and that just kind of goes back to the delta between gross and net revenue is so incredibly huge that it caused all of us pause. And then the notion that even the revenue generated from this project may not ultimately cover the cost of the project or come very close to it. The idea that there's going to be substantially additional discretionary revenue that could be used for diversion, reduction versus creating a mandated process where we're looking to achieve certain broader things. I mean, I guess that's all kind of part of the conversation going forward. Does that get factored into the kind of the rate setting process, or is the rate setting process within the kind of the narrower constraints initially? Like when I think we've seen kind of general ranges of tolling rates, and you said I think that's like 6 months out will be kind of when that is set. Is that rate kind of being set based on just the specific parameters that we're laying out right now, or is consideration being given to, boy, if we need to have X% available for diversion mitigation, not related to tolling, because of safety reasons or whatever that is, is that going to be part of that conversation?
I'm happy to come back and maybe bring Travis with me, but we've been doing quite a bit of work on financial scenario consideration for 205 and really thinking about how to balance different trade-offs as we're thinking about potential rate structures that could allow us to achieve our target of 385 million in revenue to contribute to construction costs. So thinking about diversion and thinking about revenue and thinking about congestion relief have all factored into that process. And the commission has determined, based on recommendation from ODOT, what scenarios to continue to evaluate in the next level of analysis. So the level 2 traffic and revenue work is underway. And we'll have findings from that later this year. So there's multiple factors that go into kind of what we would want the rate structure to be. And we're trying to be transparent about that.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. McKay.
Yes. Okay. One of the statements that was just made in the last 5 minutes is like the funds could be used for mitigation. But at the last RTAC meeting, Director Strickler said, you don't get any for 30 years. And that was very disturbing. It's like, until we pay off the 385 million, it's all ours. You get nothing. And for you to say that, well, maybe we could help with mitigation, contradicts exactly what Mr. Strickler said in the January meeting. And Commissioner Savas did pick it up correct. Next month, OTC is going to go forward to get bonding, because right now, the bonding that you have for the balance of the construction of Abernathy Bridge is House Bill 3055 bonding. And ODOT wants to convince OTC to go with a different kind of bonding so they can do that exact thing of you get nothing. The money all goes to ODOT 100%. Can we please start hearing the truth and having Director Strickler here, because we're getting conflicting messages and you're fooling around with our lives. You're fooling around with our communities. We just can't take it anymore. And this will be the first time ever that the feds would ever approve after the fact tolling. Always they approve of it before the fact. And the Abernathy Bridge was never, when it was started back in 2022, going to be a tolling only project. It was going to be I-205, never Abernathy Bridge. And I'll do the last part because I know everybody here in this conversation here didn't get it. ODOT had $810 million in the ending fund balance as of June 30th, 2023, from the audited financial statements. Why don't we stop this and use that money and take the pressure off our community?
Thanks for those comments, Mr. McCabe. I definitely don't want to be contradicting my boss. I can again go back and review the comments that the director had at last RTAC meeting. Maybe Commissioner Savas, you have a memory of that. We likely are looking at a 30 or 35-year bond term for the tollback bonds for Abernathy Bridge, moving forward with that. And as I mentioned, the priority for the revenue is to contribute to construction costs for 205. We do have mitigation dollars assumed in budget planning as we're moving forward. And there still are a lot of details to figure out in terms of long-term revenue planning and when money will be available and how it'll be used.
Thank you, Bandy, for replying. In response to the 30 years, I will go back and check as well. And I don't say this with any certainty, but my memory about the dialogue of the 30 years was the revenue sharing for mitigation that hypothetically would go to jurisdictions for mitigation they saw fit, versus perhaps the mitigation that ODOT from this point forward sees as fit, what would come from the tolling revenues directly before revenue sharing. I think that's the hypothetical understanding that I had. But I certainly will go back and listen and maybe ask a couple of our staff to do the same as well. So we'll get some clarification on that, John. With that, any other questions for Mandy? We have Trent online, ready to go to chat with us. Okay, seeing none. Mandy, thank you. I do want to just share one thing. I heard the passion of Mr. McCabe here, and I reckon back to a town hall that I held at Athey Creek Middle School a few years ago, and I had the sheriff along with us, and he made a presentation as well, trying to respond to neighbors in the Borland Stafford area with regards to the accidents that were happening as a result of the existing diversion from the bottleneck. And some very heartfelt stories and deaths that were happening on there, and be mindful that a lot of those roads in that area have deep culverts, and typically any car that rolls in there at any kind of a decent speed, even a posted speed, is likely to roll over, and a lot of those deaths are related to rollovers. So those are the existing conditions today, and we know it's going to take hundreds of millions of dollars to remedy those third lanes of I-205, and we just don't have those tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to do that with. So that said, thank you again, Mandy, and Trent, you're up.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Yep.
Hi, thanks for having me today. Trent Wilson, Clackamas County Government Affairs. I am joining you today from Salem, where we're trying to track various topics going on with the legislature. One of our updates today is about the Special Subcommittee on Transportation Planning. I've been in meetings with some of you already, connecting with Representative Hartman, who serves on that particular subcommittee. And they have been tasked with taking a look under the hood, so to speak, on the issue of tolling, and have been taking deep dives during the legislative session into various topics such as diversion, the location of toll gantries, how revenue will be collected, or how tolls will be collected. And so that has been their visitation here during the session so far. Many of you already know and participated in the meetings before session, which were those community visits by that subcommittee into 2 meetings in Portland, 1 meeting in Wilsonville, 1 meeting at Gladstone High School. And so great turnouts there. I think that overall, the turnouts from those meetings have really informed the members of this special subcommittee. Very different tone and questions from those serving on that subcommittee from what we saw in September and November when they were meeting the first few times to the types of questions they're asking now. So I would say the issues that were brought forward at those community meetings have been front and center in the questions that ODOT's been needing to answer as they've been doing those presentations. I would say for y'all's purposes, that's a big win. So congratulations. What we've heard about this subcommittee to date is that the subcommittee is still on task to do what they had initially sort of reported was their plan and timeline, which is that they will try to conclude their meetings. They initially had a goal of 10 meetings. They're getting pretty close to that, but it should end here near the end of session, so early March, and they will ultimately reach some sort of recommendation that they will deliver to the Joint Committee on Transportation. So I don't anticipate that this subcommittee or the special subcommittee will extend into the interim or live well past or much past the short session that we're in now. They're ultimately working towards some sort of recommendation to be determined on what that's going to look like or how it will manifest. One thing that is required that we know will also be required before they closed is answering a variety of questions that community members have submitted to members of the special subcommittee that they have then submitted onward. So ODOT, I believe, will be tasked with answering those questions in writing, will not be in front of like a microphone, for example, or at a hearing, but they will be tasked with answering those questions in writing to those members of the subcommittee, and it will inform, that's what my understanding, it will inform their recommendation to the Joint Committee on Transportation. So all this a little bit is a segue into like what is that recommendation ultimately working towards? What will that recommendation mean? Will it just live on a shelf, or will it live beyond that? I think that's a fair question. That's one that I have. But if y'all are having that same question, I think that's a pretty valid question to be asking. because y'all put a lot of work into the subcommittee. They've put a lot of work into it. And I think this is an observation, general feeling I'm noticing on the dais when I'm watching these meetings with ODOT is that there are just questions that feel incomplete or unanswered. I think a good example is this last week. There were some questions about the location of toll gantries. One of the representatives said, "Can you tell me more about gantry location for the Boone Bridge?" And you all know this, ODOT knows this, no surprises. There is no existing target location for toll gantries on the Boone Bridge. ODOT said that very clearly. They said, "We can't talk to you about that because we don't know where it's going to be," which is fair. But we can talk to you about this toll gantry location for the I-205 Abernathy Bridge project, where we definitely know it's going to be, which is also fair. I think what's challenging from a staff perspective, as we're watching an answer like that, is here is the subcommittee tasked with looking at tolling at large. They're using the toll gantry locations on one very specific type of project, but are sort of consequently or at the same time having a broad discussion about tolling in general. So yes, the Abernathy Bridge toll program, but also we know that ODOT's working on the RMPP program. And I think it's fair to have some questions and try to get to some level of understanding of what will those types of projects look like? What will toll gantry locations look like? How is it the same or similar as what you're doing here? The legislators didn't ask those questions, so maybe that's a miss on their part. Not for me to say, but I think that's where we continue to see some of the separation about what's happening in these subcommittees, what ODOT is able to present with full detail, which I think is fair. We would do the same at Clackamas County. If you don't have information, you don't want to put out conjecture, right? But we also know that they are doing work on it. So it would be nice to hear some of that dialogue. I would struggle knowing that this subcommittee is tasked with looking under the hood and having incomplete information for a recommendation that they have to make in a couple of weeks, knowing that recommendation could actually be influencing how the RMPP moves forward if they're not actually having a robust discussion about the RMPP. So those are some just general observations about, yes, there's a good opportunity here. Yes, there are legislators who are interested. Yes, there are still gaps in the information, similar to what you all have talked about or seen when ODOT has visited here as well. I'm happy to take some questions on the special subcommittee on transportation planning, but then also use it as a segue into the next thing, which is the McLean framework. So I'll stop here for questions.
Questions? Okay. Just one comment. After the presentation and the discussion, it occurred to me, Trent, when you mentioned the RMPP, I call it the other layer of the cake. But it occurs to me that we ought to be maybe foreseeing what name we're going to call the RMPP diversion, right? We have a name for the tolling diversion. Are we going to have a separate name for the congestion pricing diversion? So we'll wait and see. But at the end of the day, again, my concern is at the end of the day, when someone crashes their car, I don't think people are going to ask, why did you divert? Was it tolling you diverted? Was it congestion pricing you diverted? Or was it the bottleneck? People, to me, that safety thing is just not being recognized. And it's just being disregarded. But I did appreciate some of the members of the committee, both this last Friday and the Friday before, talk about some of those local roads and their capacity or not to handle all that traffic and those issues. So you're right. They have drawn attention to it. I think our work here and at those hearings was valuable. And so I think we have a lot to be thankful for and look at our successes, and we just keep on advocating. So I appreciate that. John, I see your hand up again.
Yeah, mine is one of the things that was brought out in the meeting before was they brought up Scudder Falls Bridge. That became a tolling bridge going between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And the only reason why I know of it, because we avoided it when we were transferring my daughter from Cornell University to Penn for graduate studies. So I went back and looked it up. And this is what really has to get out, is the fact that the bridge, they only told people going from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, not the other way. And they built it from 4 lanes to 8 lanes. And the number of people using the bridge went down 50%. So there's a lot of diversion in that community. as there will be a lot of diversion here when people see that it's tolling. And I guess one of the presentations that was made before the legislature last month is that you will find out how much you're going to pay for the tolling less than one block before you get to the toll. That is going to cost so many people, depending on what the toll is, to divert immediately off of 205 to Highway 43. Safety doesn't seem to be any of their concern. And based on what happened, information there, and that's the other thing I don't like, is they're giving this information to the legislatures minutes before they begin. This information should be given to the legislature weeks before, so the legislators and the staff can review and come up with better questions.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. Yeah, that example came up. I think legislators were quick to point out a similar observation that you made, that it wasn't an apples to apples bridge at the end of the toll program, that there was additional lanes, additional programs, additional transit, additional capacity on that project. So I think that was a very similar feeling. I will just say, just expectation setting, and some of y'all know this, but if you don't, I'm happy to share it. At the legislature, information is not really due to the legislators for a hearing. Yes, before is great, but even up to 48 hours after the hearing has already happened is also acceptable here. And so it's on the public record, I think, is maybe the best you can hope for. That's not saying it's a great system. I'm not here to say that, but that is the don't hate the player, hate the game kind of situation.
Okay. Councilor Sherman.
Very good. Actually, Mr. McCabe makes a good point that I experienced this week, and it's the notion that, we kind of assume, or we start with the assumption that, it's the people that live here that are going to know when there's a toll and they're going to divert and do these things. But, there are going to be a significant number of people that have never driven that road before and are going to have to make a snap judgment as to where they're going to go when they see that toll sign. And the reason I say that is because flying into to Newark this weekend, I made the mistake of plugging in my destination in Connecticut into a nav system that I didn't realize somebody had set to avoid toll roads, which is a setting in every nav system now to avoid toll roads. And so what should have been about an hour, 45-minute easy drive on toll roads turned into about 2.5 hours on surface streets running through Harlem and back and forth across bridges. And it created for me like 45 minutes of surface street driving that I never would have ever done, but without being familiar with the area, I just did that. And I would assume that we're going to have a similar type of circumstance when people come and drive through the area if they're not familiar with it. So I thought that was a pretty intriguing point. Not what you're talking about, Trent. So to your question, so, as I was asking Mandy just about kind of the net versus gross revenue generated, and there's kind of that original document that we saw, and I think what she told me when she told me that my question referred to the latter and not the former was that the document we saw only laid out the operational costs for what can be attributed to the Abernathy Bridge and not to the broader system. So that like 70% that goes away to all that infrastructure and operational expense. So that's, I was originally assuming that the reason that they said it gets more efficient as we add more gantry locations around the system was because they were showing us some of those costs are going to be system-wide costs. And so, that's going to be, spread out over time. But did I hear that differently today? And my question then goes back to, as we have kind of this special subcommittee digging into this information, trying to make, decisions based on this. Again, we've got all this kind of really complex, half-answered type questions. How can you ever make a judgment call without knowing very specifically how these numbers impact each other? And then also, since Abernathy Bridge is the gateway drug to RMPP, and they're inexplicably intertwined, how can we not look at the big picture as part of this process versus just identifying the one piece, getting approval, moving ahead, and building all the rest of it? What am I missing, and how are they going to figure this stuff out if we can't figure this stuff out?
Yeah, I'll try to cover. There are 3 questions in there.
All right. Yep. Sorry about that.
One of them is what was said and what was heard. And so I'm not going to speak to that because I was multitasking during Mandy's presentation and I don't know what you heard. So I'm gonna pass on that one. Number two is this level of where are the legislators having this conversation about the revenue and the net revenue and so on. And so that was supposed to be part of the conversation at last Friday's special subcommittee on transportation planning. They just were getting to it near the end of the discussion. And so the co-chairs asked ODOT to come back and start with that conversation at this Friday's meeting. And so that's coming up. And there was a conversation yesterday with some of the mayors around the Abernathy Bridge to sort of talk about that, try to figure out like what are some of the questions around those pieces so that Representative Hartman has an idea of where some of the concern could be. And so I would invite you to go back to the January C4 meeting for those of you who just might be listening. The January C4 meeting, which is online, and Brian, I'm trying to remember this. It's clackamas./C4, clackamas.us/C4. You can find a meeting of Mayor Bialostowski talking about his findings on some of the revenue generation pieces. So I want to say here for the record, those are his findings. And, you know, I think there was a conversation to be had around what those are versus what ODOT's sharing. And I think that legislators are attuned to that because that was part of his testimony at the Gladstone meeting. And so I think I'm curious to see if those conversations come up from legislators to ODOT when they broach this topic on Friday. But the short answer to your question is they haven't covered that piece yet. And then the third question about, you know, does it benefit us to be talking about two projects versus one project? And I would say, I think I speak for a lot of our staff, that's been a major source of heartburn for us for a long time. It was a major source of heartburn during the initial EA process when they were talking about the 205 project and sometimes talking about the RMPP. That has continued to be a source of heartburn because it seems as though the 205 supplemental EA coming up, and we've heard this from ODOT, supplemental EA will focus only on the 205 bridge and the project as designed there. It will not consider the RMPP. However, when they start the NEPA process for RMPP, it will consider the 205 project because, you know, very technical words that are, you know, beyond Trent. So it does seem like it is benefiting in some cases to use both and not benefiting in others. And I think that has been a big problem. If you're just asking Trent, that's a big problem when even at the legislature, you're talking about, I can't talk to you about all the toll gantries, but I can talk to you about this one. Doesn't it look good? Yes, there will be, you know, 200 more, but this is the one example I can give you today that doesn't feel to Trent like a fair representation of the conditions that will be on our freeway system, or not free, the interstate system, when tolling comes online. So I think that, yes, that's a huge problem. In our estimation, it's been a major source of contention for us.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and before you move on, and I know we got time, or just checking a time check here at 1 o'clock with some time left, but one thing I did hear, maybe I misheard it or maybe it was just misspoken, but in that vein of the revenue sharing and the waterfall, Mr. Brower made a comment that the net revenue would pay for debt service. And I thought, wait a minute, I thought gross, you know, out of the gross before it became net was debt service, right? I thought that was the primary purpose of why we're tolling. So that should come out of the gross. But my question is, if debt service comes out of net, then what comes out of gross? Because if you look at the waterfall, there's other operational costs that come out after net. So, I mean, it's just convoluted. It's not clear. And maybe Friday we'll hear some more clarity, but I picked up on that. Again, maybe I misheard it or maybe he misspoke, but I left more confused on that than I did clear. That said, so Trent, carry on.
Thank you. The next part of our agenda is a discussion about the McLean framework. And I think this is a good segue because the Special Subcommittee on Transportation will ultimately make a recommendation to the Joint Committee on Transportation. And including in your packets is a framework that's been released to the legislature. It is a draft. It says like draft 12, I think, on the document if you find it online in the legislature. So they've been working this pretty hard, but I would say it's still incomplete. The legislature, I believe, still hasn't had a chance to fully discuss this topic yet, but it ultimately sets out concepts and sort of goals around how to move from now to 2025, anticipating that there would be a transportation package in the 2025 legislative session. So I want to draw your attention to page 32 of the PDF. It's not page 32, it's page 32 of the PDF, where it sort of lays out some community meeting goals that are that they're anticipating and where those potential locations would be. I would invite you all to take some of this with a grain of salt. None of this is final. It's all a draft document. Those dates are movable and flexible. Nothing's firm, but it's a good snapshot about what they're thinking in terms of how they want to move towards 2025 with a variety of community meetings, additional community meetings about what they're hoping to accomplish, as well as using strategic touch points through the legislative days that happen after the short session towards the end of the year. I guess what I would say to everybody here, and we said this, a few of my colleagues and I said this to JPAC in January, nothing is guaranteed for 2025 for a transportation package to take effect. But what we know are some goals and needs are ODOT's funding revenue cliff is continuing to approach, and it gets harder and harder for them to fund some of just very basic O&M, to the extent where even in the short session, they're requesting money to just do plowing, snow plowing in Eastern Oregon, or cleanup in and around downtown Portland. So like those O&M pieces that you would expect to be fundamental, they're struggling to fund those in full. And that's not going to get easier for them. It's not going to get easier for larger agencies like the city of Portland, who we know are also struggling with this. So we know that like just general funding and funding resources are an issue that will be front and center during the conversation. So if the gas tax is going away, then ... how will Oregon fund transportation into the future? That's really going to be the question that they talk about next year. And I think some of these community meetings will be geared around getting a sense of where is their support on some of these types of topics. Is it vehicle miles traveled? Is it other ways? Is it tolling? Is it corridor pricing? Or is it, what is the appetite for how we do this moving forward as a state? There's also a lot of momentum around what is called in this framework unfinished business. And I want y'all to read into that Rose Quarter and I-205. And I would also just share an encouraging word that when I-205 is spoken about in this context, it is spoken about as the bottleneck, not simply or just the bridge. It's the bottleneck project. And so that third lane in both directions is the intent of that discussion. And hanging over all of this, of course, is the existing lawsuit between the Oregon Trucking Association and the state, where there is an inequity in what they are paying versus what light vehicles are paying. So there was a meeting last night with Joint Committee on Transportation to hear 3 different bills that were related to that. I regret that I was not able to attend, and it was not posted this morning on my drive into Salem this morning, so I'm not up to speed on what happened there, but my understanding is that it's very possible those bills are sort of in a courtesy zone right now, but that discussion will be used to help influence conversations to address this topic moving towards 2025. So that's the update on the framework. Again, it's very draft. It's not final. It's not a firm plan yet. There's a lot more work to be done on it, but it's out. And we wanted to share it with you so that you had some context for some of the bigger thinking in terms of how the state plans to move towards 2025. Yes.
Councilor Pratt.
I'm going to make my snarky comment here that I think it's interesting that I-205, the third lane's like a top thing, but then none of these meetings are scheduled in Clackamas County.
Yes. I think that's fair.
One thing I just want to share with you all, Trent, I think you already know this, but as I talk to people around the state with regard to this, and in high places as well, state legislature and so forth, and even some local elected officials outside of Clackamas County, and then some the point I'm trying to make here is that those that are defensive and seemingly supportive of tolling are making this argument that that's how we're going to get ODOT out of its funding cliff, right? And that this funding cliff, as Trent mentioned, is around the corner. It's coming. But if you all think about it, you know, I from a practical standpoint, I asked myself, so is all this tolling money of I-205 or RMPP going to fund the funding cliff for the whole state? And obviously it can't. So there's this misperception and misunderstanding that it could, because tolling is at least a decade away or more for anywhere else in the state of the Portland metro region, right? That the funding cliff comes before the next 10 years. So, I mean, this misunderstanding, or unless there's a deliberate attempt for I-205 to pay for the state's funding woes, is not practical. Probably very challengeable, nor is RMPP for the metro region to pay ODOT's way out of the funding cliff they have when it comes to maintenance. So, you know, there's an argument, but it's not really a practical solution. So I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Now, in there, of course, in all truthful, we know this. I'm not ignoring the fact that whether it's a gas tax increase in 2025 or it's a road user charge, that really is the answer to the funding cliff, frankly. It's going to be a combination of one of those and weight mile adjustments. That's where we're going to get out, unless there's a statewide tolling effort, right? When it's implemented statewide. But I just want to just raise your attention to that. It seems obvious, but I don't think it's all that obvious to some of the people that are supporting tolling. Councilor Sherman.
I think that's a reasonable observation, and it seems like, you know, if I may, it seems like a lot of the reason we're having the conversation only just tolling without all of the other buckets at this point is because let's pass tolling first. Let's, you know, they want that to get done. And then as we realize that that's not going to cover all the rest of the costs, we're still going to have to go down the path of all the other funding buckets that have been on the table. But if we truly took all the buckets and kind of laid everything out initially, we may find that tolling may not be as robust a solution as we'd like to have. And I think to your point, you know, the idea is, you know, we could potentially have tolling across the whole state, but we've already found that the infrastructure costs are so incredibly high. How will you do that over the hundreds plus of miles? I don't even know how many miles of highway are in the state that we'd potentially be putting tolling gantries on and trying to maintain and staff maintenance and all the other things. So I really don't know how all those pieces would ultimately fit together and what gets us there. And especially since, are there any other states that have that robust a tolling structure in place? I'm not aware of any. One question I do have, and this is related but not on the Rose Quarter. I was just looking at the drawing on page 73 of our packet, and I know that, you know, a lot of the underlying cost of that was the idea of like creating the top again and reconnecting the neighborhood. Am I missing something there? What neighborhood are we reconnecting? Hasn't all of that become industrial in that immediate area? Is there any neighborhood left to reconnect in that area? What am I, or maybe I'm just misunderstanding what that project is. I mean, does anybody have any light they can shed on that for me?
Yeah, it's the Rose Quarter. It's that area in which the area was redlined back in the day and basically disconnected. So it's trying to join, or basically with the lid would give opportunities to add housing and community and a lot of things. So it basically, if you look at I-5 as the wedge that divided their community, the lid would bridge that.
So the lid is where the actual residential growth would happen, would just be on top of that?
I don't know the exact details, but that's my oversimplification.
Okay. I'm just not being, you know, very familiar with the area, but having driven through as I'm passing by, I always had, you know, from the history, I always had the image in my mind that there were these disjointed neighborhoods that were separated, that weren't able to be together again, but I haven't seen those disjointed neighborhoods, or maybe they have spread over time, or I've been infiltrated with businesses. I don't know kind of what that looks like. Okay, that's not important today.
I can offer just a little bit of insight into that. It's the Albina neighborhood. It's a historic Black community, and sort of what the lid is seeking to respond to is the fracture that occurred both because of the I-5 construction, but also the legacy development of that hospital right there. And so there are quite a few residential properties that really have literally been sort of split in half. And so that lit is trying to sort of provide that bridge. I think that there's some like envisioning for like, you know, street level commercial with like development of apartments and condos.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Isn't a lot of that area gentrified at this point, though? Or is that just another topic?
That's also another dynamic that is being played out right now. But I know the city of Portland and a number of community organizations have been working on like right to return type of policies for that neighborhood.
Okay, great. Trent, anything else?
Yes, I want to transition a little bit while you have a couple minutes towards a lingering topic the executive committee has, I think, invited y'all to discuss is whether or not to entertain a letter related to a request to ODOT to extend the environmental analysis. Brian, if you could bring Jamie Stasny in here with me just so that I don't misspeak on some of the details here. But what I understand here so far is that there have been multiple requests at the staff level to have an extension on the supplemental EA that's coming out for the new version of the project. So that is set at 30 days, which is a threshold set by NEPA. And there have, again, requests at various staff levels to say, we had 45 days for the first EA. It would be nice to have at least 45 days for this next EA. My understanding as well is that staff has requested various information on what's to come out. And some of that has been either not shared or not shared in full, or that we'll see it in the upcoming supplemental EA. And so, whereas before, I think some of the discussion was that the county and partners had been part of the conversation leading to the introduction of the EA before. This supplemental EA, number one, the responses to the questions from the last EA have not been in full or direct. They were sort of summarized based on question themes. So it's unclear how those will be implemented into the supplemental EA. The project scope has changed. And I think that there's still continuing concern about the topic Councilor Sherman raised earlier, which is, you know, are we talking about the 205 project, the tolling project, the RMPP project, how the 205 toll project will relate to the RMPP project, how they relate to existing diversion. So that the jumbling or the combining of those various topics, I think, was a huge piece of concern for the supplemental EA. And without the conversation or dialogue between then and now, for this upcoming supplemental EA, will 30 days be sufficient? And our staff has felt like, no, in fact, it was not the first time. It should not be this time. And it would be great if they could extend it. So at the staff level, they have told us no. We have now had, like, I think a little bit of a staff to staff formal notice that there will not be an extension. So we wanted to raise that with you, the Toll Strategy Subcommittee, to invite your feedback. Is that sufficient at the elected level, or would you like to raise it to C4? And sort of host or produce a broader statement and potentially move it up the chain, or not. So we wanted to start that conversation here. Jamie, if I missed something, please correct it.
Great introduction. You kind of heard my thoughts earlier that I share with Mandy that you know, let's just say that the EA drops the day after a city council meeting. It's going to take time, maybe another month, right, for the city council to meet, and then to craft the letter and send it. So there's 5 weeks potentially, right, depending if it's a short month or a long month. So let alone all the staff time it takes to work on it, or, you know, allowing the council to actually give staff the direction to act on it, which might take a special meeting. So anyhow, I just think the logistics of it are really not fair or practical. So I would definitely advocate that we recommend to the greater C4 group that we send either some kind of a recommendation or an effort, or start crafting a letter and trying to get some signatures on it, if we will, to advocate for more than 30 days, 45, 60 days. I think we'll go for 60. We're not going to get more. So let's just go. I don't know. I just think 60 would be reasonable, not excessive at this point.
C4 has historically asked for 60 days. in previous iterations of asking for extensions.
Right. You know, and one other thing, I mean, I sense there's probably support to do that, but it's one other thing. We've been waiting a long time to get some answers on what the diversion numbers are and the diversion numbers are. And it pains me that we're still at this point where we still don't have a lot of answers. And it's also to watch ODOT staff testify in front of the state, the special subcommittee, and they ask them questions, and ODOT still doesn't have all the answers for them. They have a lot of answers, but not all of them. So, you know, it begs the question, if they're not ready, why are we limited to 30 days? So, Councilor Sherman.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that, you know, generating a logo letter at the higher level, maybe even coordinating with our other, you know, county friends to have an equivalent type thing happening, I think has a lot of power. And I do think that, you know, the more that we can move forward on our side in a coordinated effort, you know, the more leverage it creates. And so I'm all in favor of doing that.
Would you like this letter from C4 requesting the extension to be a logo letter or just a letter from C4?
Well, I would ask Trent, do you think we need to have that level of detail now, or is there a staff recommendation? What are your thoughts? I mean, what's going to make the impact to either the OTC or the state legislature? What's going to have more thrust?
Volume is always nice when you're talking with the folks at the legislature, but I don't know if your audience is necessarily the legislature for this letter. Your audience is ODOT, right? And so having something from C4 certainly has merit as like a place where representatives from all of the county jurisdictions come together to make a coordinated policy recommendation. So that is the value of a place like C4, which is what makes it, I think, strong in many ways. If ODOT were to reply to C4 and deny that, I think that's when you start to see other local and even state level leaders step in and say more things. And so I guess my feeling here is a C4 letter could be sufficient for this particular request. And you could copy, you know, everybody on it if you wanted to, and then that sort of gets spreads it around, so to speak. I think it's when you get to the broader thing, like the submitting your comment letter for something like the EA, you wouldn't want to just have that only be a C4 letter with everybody who's participating. You'd want that to have everyone have their unique letters, and then maybe even have a robust umbrella letter from someplace like C4. So that would be my initial reaction to that. I see Jamie has some opinions too.
Yeah, Jamie.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, I agree with everything Trent said, and also note that in the chat I placed a comment that FHWA will be the real audience for this request, as well as ODOT. But I do think asking OTC and the legislators for support is helpful as well. And I agree with Trent, a letter from C4 would be great. I think we could build some other coalition and logo letters with business community and others, as we've done in the past, that reference the letter from C4. So I think we can do a lot with that, but I do think it's appropriate to have the letter itself come from C4.
It would seem logical. I mean, what if we were trying to get some of our federal delegation folks to sign on as well?
So again, I think what I would say here is what is having a letter that C4 sort of represents is maybe like a great place to stand on. And where I think that goes from there is having that come from like a local audience is unique. And what I can do is, you know, after this phone call, I'll be in the halls over here in Salem, and I can share with our bottleneck delegation, if you want to call them that, like that we are working on this, and on the 7th, on March 7th, C4 will consider this conversation. So I can share that with them at the legislative level, and they can choose to act or use some of our language that, you know, they can reference or use us as a resource for their own effort or similar effort. Likewise, you know, we do have good relationships with our federal delegation. We can start talking about this with them. I think they will, because the audience is also FHWA, they will want that final letter to be working from, not necessarily to be signing on to. So having the letter done will be the resource that they will need if they are going to be active on this.
All right. We don't take motions, but Councilor Sherman, would you like to kind of make one and we'll just have consensus?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. I think you know, I would move that per Trent's recommendation that we move up to the C4 level, the creation of a letter requesting extension of the notification timeframe from 30 days to 60 days.
If everyone can signify agreement with a raised hand, whether it's electronic or otherwise. John? Okay. That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have that direction, and you will see that draft letter in the packet for the March 7 meeting.
Okay. Great. Excellent. John?
Yeah, are we going to also ask, once the letter's out, to have all the other cities sign on to it from this Clackamas County, as we did earlier?
I think for this particular letter, I don't know if that would be necessary, just being a direct message from C4, which has that representation from, joint committees. If the answer were to come back no, that's, I think, when you might want to we might want to discuss a more robust campaign.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Trent. And we're running out of time, and so am I. I actually have a hard stop here pretty quick. So Councilor Sherman, if you'd like to take over if need be, if I have to jet. So any updates? I saw here we have the ODOT I-205 update presentation or attachment. Oh, those are attachments. Okay. So any other updates for other business? I'm sorry. All right. Seeing none, we're all done. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.